Little Red Riding Hood, retold by Bonnie Dobkins, illustrated by Subhandu Karamarkar. Once upon a time, a little girl lived with her mother and brother in a small cottage by the edge of the forest. Her favorite piece of clothing was a long red cape with a soft, silky hood. She wore it often, and everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, Little Red Riding Hood was bored and looking for something to do. "You could sweep the floors," said her mother, who was busy painting the fence. "No," said Little Red Riding Hood, "I don't think that's what I want to do." "You could help clean the yard," said her brother, who was busy chopping wood. "No," said Little Red Riding Hood, "I know that isn't what I want to do." "Then you could visit your grandmother," said her mother. You're old enough to go by yourself, and you haven't seen her for weeks." "That's exactly what I want to do," said Little Red Riding Hood. "Grandmother lives on the other side of the woods. It will be an adventure." So Little Red Riding Hood's mother packed a basket full of treats for the girl to take to her grandmother. "Just remember," said her mother, the woods can be very dangerous. So when you leave, please go straight to Grandma's and don't be late." "She won't listen," said her brother. "Yes, I will," said Little Red Riding Hood. "Of course she will," said her mother. "Oh, and dear, something else. Before you go, only talk to those you know." "She won't listen," said her brother. "Yes, I will," said Little Red Riding Hood. "Of course she will," said her mother. "Oh, and one last thing, sweetheart. From the path you shouldn't stray, or you could get lost someday." "She won't listen," said her brother. "Yes, I will," said Little Red Riding Hood. "Of course she will," said Mother. "Goodbye, dear. Give your grandmother a big hug for me." "Yes, Mother," said Little Red Riding Hood. Then she headed out the door, down the path, and into the forest. There was so much to see in the woods: a sleeping owl, a giant mushroom, an amazing spider web. Little Red Riding Hood remembered what her mother said: "When you leave, please go straight to Grandmother's and don't be late." "But," thought Little Red Riding Hood, "Mother surely would want me to enjoy the forest." So she stopped and looked around. Just then, a dark shape stepped out from behind one of the trees. It was a wolf, and he was smiling and charming. "Well, hello, Little Red Riding Hood," said the wolf. "Isn't this a lovely day?" Little Red Riding Hood remembered what her mother said. "Before you go, only talk to those you know." Mother surely wouldn't mind. "Hello, Mr. Wolf," said Little Red Riding Hood. "Yes, it is a lovely day, and you seem to be such a delightful child." The wolf smiled. "Everyone calls me Little Red Riding Hood," said the girl. "A splendid name," said the wolf. "And where might you be headed?" "If I may ask." "You may. I'm going to bring Grandmother a basket of treats." Oh, how kind of you. In fact, wouldn't your grandmother like a lovely bouquet of wild flowers as well? There are some just over the hill." Red Riding Hood remembered what her mother said: "From the path you should not stray." But thought Red Riding Hood, "Mother surely would want Grandmother to have flowers. That is a wonderful idea, Mr. Wolf." And she picked some. "Goodbye, Little Red Riding Hood," said the wolf. "Goodbye," said Little Red Riding Hood. The moment Red Riding Hood disappeared, the wolf dashed down the path toward Grandmother's cottage. He tapped lightly. "Grandmother," he said. In his best little girl voice. "It is me, Little Red Riding Hood." "Little Red Riding Hood? How wonderful." Grandmother flung open the door. "Wait," she said, "you're not Red Riding Hood?" "Sadly, no," said the wolf. Goodbye." He swallowed the grandmother in one big gulp. Sometime later, Little Red Riding Hood came up on the woods, and she was dirty. It was much harder to find the path again than I thought it would be," she said. She was surprised to find Grandmother's door open. "Grandmother, are you home?" "Yes, dear," came a scratchy voice from the bed. "But I'm in bed, and I'm afraid I have a nasty cold." Red Riding Hood followed the voice into the bedroom. The curtains were closed, and it was very dark. Grandmother was wearing a floppy nightcap. Red Riding Hood moved toward the bed. Grandmother's eyes looked very odd. "Why, Grandmother," she said, "what big eyes you have." "The better to see you with, my dear. Come closer so I can give you a hug." Red Riding Hood took another step and saw two big odd triangles poking up under the nightcap. And Grandmother, what big ears you have! The better to hear you with, my dear. Can you come a bit closer still? Just then the blanket slipped from Grandmother's face, revealing 2 rows of very sharp teeth. But Grandmother, said Red Riding Hood, what big teeth you have! The better to eat you with, roared the wolf, leaping out of Grandmother's bed. Red Riding Hood screamed. She ran out of the bedroom, through the main room, into the kitchen, slamming doors behind her. She clambered into a cupboard and yanked the door shut. Oh, why didn't I listen to Mother, she said. If I hadn't stopped in the woods, I wouldn't have met the wolf. If I hadn't talked to the wolf, I wouldn't have left the path. If I hadn't left the path, I wouldn't have been late to Grandmother's. Then none of this would have happened. In the kitchen, she could hear the wolf calling her name. Where are you, little Red Riding Hood? He said. There's no need to hide. I'm going to find you and eat you no matter what. Just then something crashed, a voice yelled. Dishes smashed, the sounds got louder and louder and wilder, and then everything went quiet. Little Red Riding Hood peeked out of the cabinet. There stood her brother with his axe in one hand, and he was helping Grandmother out of the wolf. Thank you, dear, said Grandmother. It was very dark in there. The brother looked at Little Red Riding Hood. I knew you wouldn't listen. Little Red Riding Hood scrambled out of the cabinet and gave her brother a big, big hug. You were right, she said, but I will from now on. Then Red Riding Hood, her brother, and Grandmother all sat down together to eat a treat from the basket. The end.